The morning sun cast long shadows across the glass towers of downtown, but inside the top floor of Sterling Tech Industries, CEO Robert Sterling felt nothing but darkness closing in around him. His corner office, which once symbolized his success, now felt like a prison. The city sprawled below him through floor-to-ceiling windows, but all he could see were the numbers flashing red on his computer screen. 40%. That's how much his company's stock had dropped in just 3 months. $50 billion of value gone. 20 years of building his empire crumbling before his eyes. And it all came down to one simple problem that nobody could solve. Robert loosened his silk tie and walked over to the massive monitor displaying lines of code that might as well have been ancient hieroglyphs to him. The quantum computing system his company had spent 5 years developing was supposed to revolutionize everything. Weather prediction, medical research, financial modeling, space exploration. This machine could do calculations in minutes that would take regular computers thousands of years. But there was one tiny problem. Well, not so tiny anymore. The system kept crashing, not just shutting down like a normal computer, but completely destroying months of work in seconds. Scientists would feed it complex problems. The machine would hum along perfectly for days or weeks, and then suddenly, crash. Everything gone. No warning, no pattern, no explanation. His assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "Sir, the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. "They're all here," Robert nodded grimly. He knew what they wanted to discuss. The same thing they'd been talking about for weeks. Cutting losses, shutting down the quantum division, laying off hundreds of brilliant engineers and scientists, admitting defeat. As he walked down the hallway toward the conference room, Robert passed the employee break room. Through the glass door, he could see some of his engineers hunched over laptops, probably still trying to crack the code that had stumped everyone. Their faces looked tired, defeated. These weren't just any engineers, he'd hired the absolute best. PhD graduates from MIT, Cambridge, Stanford. People who had solved problems that others thought impossible. And they were all stuck. The conference room buzzed with tense conversation as Robert entered. 12 of the most powerful executives in the tech industry sat around the polished mahogany table, and every face turned toward him with the same expression, concern mixed with barely hidden frustration. "Gentlemen," Robert began, taking his seat at the head of the table, "I know why we're here." David Chen, his chief technology officer and oldest friend, spoke first. "Robert, we've tried everything. We've brought in quantum physicists from around the world. We've rewritten the code from scratch 4 times. We've replaced every piece of hardware. The crashes keep happening, and we can't find any pattern. Our biggest client just threatened to cancel their contract," added the chief financial officer. "They were going to pay us $2 billion for weather modeling calculations." $2 billion, Robert. They can't afford to lose months of work every time our system decides to have a breakdown. Robert felt his jaw clench. What about the team from Germany? The ones who solved the particle accelerator problem at CERN? "They gave up last week," David replied quietly. "They said our quantum decoherence issues are unlike anything they've ever seen. It's like the machine is fighting against itself." The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Robert stared at the architectural model of their quantum computer sitting in the center of the table, a miniature version of the real machine housed 3 floors below them. It looked so simple, so elegant. How could something so beautiful cause so much trouble? "What are our options?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer. His legal counsel, an older man with gray hair, spoke up. "We could shut down the quantum division, focus on our traditional computing business. Cut our losses at about $30 billion. $30 billion, Robert repeated slowly. Just like that. "The alternative is bankruptcy," the CFO said bluntly. "If we keep burning money trying to fix this problem, we'll be out of business in 6 months. Robert stood up suddenly, his chair rolling backward. The frustration that had been building for months finally erupted. "Do you know what this means? This isn't just about money. This machine could change everything. Medical researchers could find cures for diseases that have plagued humanity for centuries. Climate scientists could predict natural disasters weeks in advance and save millions of lives. Space agencies could calculate trajectories for missions to other galaxies." He began pacing around the room, his voice rising. And we're going to give up because of some glitch that we can't figure out? I didn't build this company by running away from problems. Robert, David said gently, we've tried everything. Maybe some problems just can't be solved with our current understanding of quantum mechanics? No. Robert slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. I don't accept that. Somewhere out there is someone who can figure this out. Someone who can look at this problem from a different angle and see what we're all missing. He looked around the room at the faces of the smartest people he knew. I'm making you all a promise right now. If anyone can fix this quantum decoherence problem and make our system stable, I will personally write them a check for $100 million. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. $100 million was more than most of these executives made in their entire careers. Robert, that's... David started. Crazy? Desperate? Maybe it is. Robert's voice carried a hint of bitter laughter. But I'd rather be crazy than defeated. Put the word out. Every university, every research lab, every garage inventor with a quantum physics degree, $100 million to whoever can solve this problem. As the executives filed out of the conference room, still buzzing about Robert's dramatic announcement, none of them noticed the young woman quietly cleaning the windows along the far wall. Elena Vasquez had been working for the building's cleaning service for 2 years, and she'd learned to become invisible during important meetings. Rich, powerful people tended to forget that cleaning staff had ears, but Elena hadn't just been listening, she'd been understanding. While the executives threw around terms like quantum decoherence and system crashes, Elena's mind had been working, processing, analyzing. The equations they'd been scribbling on the whiteboard weren't foreign symbols to her. They were like a familiar language. As she squeezed out her cleaning cloth and moved to the next window, Elena couldn't stop thinking about what she'd heard. These brilliant minds were stuck on a problem that seemed, from their description, very similar to something she'd been studying in her doctoral research. The more she thought about it, the more she wondered if they might be approaching the whole thing backward. Elena finished cleaning the conference room and gathered her supplies. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to listen and learn. But tonight, she had some serious thinking to do. $100 million was more money than she could even imagine, but more than that, this was a problem that genuinely fascinated her. As she waited for the elevator that would take her back to the basement where the cleaning supplies were stored, Elena smiled to herself. Sometimes the most important discoveries came from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the answer everyone was looking for was hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to see it from a completely different perspective. The elevator doors opened, and Elena stepped inside, her mind already racing with possibilities. Elena's hands shook slightly as she unlocked the door to her tiny studio apartment. The bus ride home had felt endless, her mind spinning with everything she'd overheard in that conference room. She dropped her cleaning supplies by the door and stood in the middle of her small living space, trying to process what had just happened. The apartment wasn't much, just 400 square feet that served as bedroom. Kitchen, living room, and study all in one. The paint was peeling in the corners, the radiator clanged at night, and the neighbors upstairs had a baby that cried at all hours. But it was hers, and more importantly, it was where she could think. Elena walked over to her desk, really just a folding table she'd bought secondhand, where her old laptop sat surrounded by towers of library books, physics textbooks, quantum mechanics journals, research papers she'd printed at the university library. Her entire world of learning crammed into this small corner of a rundown building. She sat down and opened her laptop, the screen flickering to life with a soft whir. While it booted up, a process that took nearly 3 minutes on the ancient machine, Elena's mind wandered back to how she'd ended up here, cleaning office buildings by day and studying quantum physics by night. Her mother, Rosa, had come to this country with nothing but hope and determination. She'd worked as a maid her entire life, cleaning houses and office buildings, sending every extra dollar toward Elena's education. "Mija," she would say in her gentle voice, "education is the one thing nobody can take away from you. It's the key to a different life." Elena had taken those words to heart. While other kids played video games or watched television, she was at the library, devouring every science book she could find. Math came naturally to her. Numbers and equations made sense in a way that social situations never did. By high school, she was teaching herself calculus from textbooks that were older than she was. Getting into university had been a miracle of scholarships and student loans. Staying there required working 20 hours a week, cleaning offices just to afford ramen noodles and bus fare. But Elena didn't mind. Every formula she learned, every problem she solved, felt like another step toward the life her mother had dreamed for her. Now, 3 years into her PhD program, Elena was specializing in something most people had never heard of: quantum error correction. It was the kind of research that happened in the shadows of the physics world, dealing with problems so complex that only a few dozen people on the planet truly understood them. Her laptop finally finished loading, and Elena opened a document she'd been working on for months, her doctoral thesis on quantum entanglement cascades. As she scrolled through pages of equations and theoretical models, something clicked in her mind. The problem those executives had been describing, the random crashes that destroyed months of work, it sounded exactly like uncorrected quantum decoherence. Elena grabbed a notebook and started sketching. If she was right, the engineers at Sterling Tech were trying to fight against the natural behavior of quantum particles instead of working with it. It was like trying to stop the ocean with a brick wall instead of building a channel to direct the water where you wanted it to go. She worked for hours, filling page after page with calculations. The radiator clanged, the baby upstairs cried, sirens wailed in the distance, but Elena heard none of it. She was lost in a world of quantum mechanics and mathematical possibilities. Around midnight, she finally sat back in her chair, staring at what she'd written. If her theory was correct, the solution wasn't just possible, it was elegant. Instead of preventing quantum decoherence, the system should embrace it and redirect it into controlled channels that would actually make the computer more stable. But Elena knew that having a theory was different from proving it worked. She needed to run simulations, test her equations, build mathematical models that would convince skeptical engineers that a cleaning lady's daughter might have solved their billion-dollar problem. The next morning, Elena dragged herself to her quantum mechanics class after only 3 hours of sleep. Professor Williams was discussing the latest research in quantum computing, completely unaware that one of his students might have just made a breakthrough that could change the entire field. The challenge, Professor Williams explained to the half-empty lecture hall, is that quantum systems are inherently unstable. The very act of observing them changes their behavior. Most researchers focus on minimizing this interference, but some theorists believe the answer might lie in embracing the chaos rather than fighting it. Elena's heart raced. Her professor was describing exactly what she'd been working on, but in general terms. She raised her hand tentatively. Yes, Elena? Professor, what if the decoherence could be channeled into a self-correcting mechanism? Like using the quantum uncertainty as a feature instead of fighting it as a bug. Professor Williams paused, considering her question. That's an interesting thought, Elena. Very theoretical, of course. The mathematics would be incredibly complex, and I'm not sure anyone has found a practical application for that approach. Elena nodded and sank back into her seat. But inside, her mind was racing. She had found a practical application, and the mathematics, while complex, were sitting in her apartment waiting to be refined. After class, Elena headed to her cleaning job at Sterling Tech. As she pushed her cart through the familiar hallways, everything looked different now. These weren't just offices, this was ground zero for the problem she might be able to solve. She found herself paying closer attention to the conversations she overheard. Engineers discussing failed tests, managers talking about budget cuts, security guards mentioning how stressed everyone seemed lately. The $100 million challenge wasn't just Robert Sterling's desperate promise. It had become the talk of the entire building. During her lunch break, Elena sat in the building's cafeteria with a peanut butter sandwich and her notebook. She pretended to study for class while actually refining her quantum error correction theory. Other employees walked past, discussing stock prices and project deadlines, completely unaware that the solution to their company's biggest problem was sitting 20 feet away, disguised as a physics student's homework. Elena's shift supervisor, Mr. Johnson, stopped by her table. Elena, you're doing good work. The executives have been complimenting how clean their conference room windows are. Keep it up. Thank you, sir, Elena replied, closing her notebook quickly. If only he knew what she'd been listening to through those clean windows. That evening, Elena took the bus to the university library. She needed access to research databases and computing power that her old laptop couldn't handle. The library stayed open until midnight, and Elena planned to use every minute. She found a computer in the back corner of the graduate study area and got to work. First, she researched everything she could find about Sterling Tech's quantum computer. The technical specifications were public information, published in scientific journals when the company first announced their breakthrough. As Elena read through the research papers, she realized that the Sterling Tech engineers were brilliant, but they were stuck in conventional thinking. Every solution they'd tried followed the traditional approach of quantum error correction: detect problems and fix them before they could cause damage. Elena's approach was completely different. Instead of detecting and correcting errors, her system would redirect the quantum decoherence into controlled pathways that would actually strengthen the overall computation. It was like turning a weakness into a strength. She spent the next 4 hours building computer simulations of her theory. The university's computers were old, but powerful enough for theoretical modeling. As Elena ran test after test, the results kept coming back the same. Her approach didn't just work. It worked better than anything currently being used in quantum computing. By the time the library closed at midnight, Elena had a complete mathematical proof of her theory, dozens of successful simulations, and a detailed plan for implementing her solution on Sterling Tech's specific hardware. She printed everything out, nearly 50 pages of calculations, graphs, and technical documentation. Walking to the bus stop with her precious papers tucked safely in her backpack, Elena felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She had solved the problem. She was sure of it. But now came the really hard part: convincing a billionaire CEO to listen to a cleaning lady's daughter who was barely old enough to drink legally. The bus ride home gave Elena time to think about what came next. She couldn't just walk into Robert Sterling's office and demand a meeting. She was nobody, a part-time employee who cleaned windows and emptied trash cans. Why would anyone listen to her? But as Elena stared out the bus window at the city lights blurring past, she remembered her mother's words about education being the key to a different life. Maybe this was her chance to use that key, to prove that brilliance could come from anywhere, even from the most unexpected places. Elena smiled to herself as the bus pulled up to her stop. Tomorrow, she would figure out how to get her solution in front of the people who needed to see it. One way or another, she was going to change her life and save Sterling Tech at the same time. Elena barely slept that night. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while her mind raced through 1,000 different scenarios. How could someone like her possibly get a meeting with Robert Sterling? The man was practically a legend in the tech world, surrounded by layers of assistants, security guards, and corporate protocol. She'd tried Googling how to meet a CEO on her phone, but all the advice assumed you were already somebody important. Network at industry events. She couldn't afford a ticket to those events. Get a referral from a mutual contact. She didn't know anyone who might know Robert Sterling. Submit a formal business proposal through proper channels. Those channels would probably toss her idea in the trash the moment they saw it came from a cleaning service employee. By 5 in the morning, Elena gave up on sleep. She made instant coffee with hot water from the tap and sat at her folding table, staring at the stack of papers that contained her solution. 50 pages of mathematical proofs, computer simulations, and detailed implementation plans. The most important work of her life, and she had no idea how to get it into the right hands. Elena got dressed in her cleaning uniform, a simple blue polo shirt and black pants that made her invisible in the corporate world. As she walked to the bus stop, a crazy idea started forming in her mind. What if being invisible was actually an advantage? What if the fact that no one paid attention to the cleaning staff was exactly what she needed? The bus ride to Sterling Tech felt different that morning. Instead of reviewing quantum physics notes or thinking about her thesis, Elena was planning something that would either change her life or get her fired? Probably both. She arrived at the building and checked in with security as usual. Officer Martinez, who'd been working the front desk for 5 years, barely looked up from his newspaper as he handed Elena her building pass. "Morning, Elena. How's school going?" "Good, Mr. Martinez. Really good, actually." Elena took the service elevator to the basement where the cleaning supplies were stored. Her supervisor, Mr. Johnson, was already there, checking off assignments on his clipboard. "Elena, you're on floors 15 through 20 today. That includes the executive conference room on 18. They had another late meeting last night, so it'll probably need extra attention." Elena's heart skipped. Floor 18 was where the executives worked, where Robert Sterling's office was located. "No problem, Mr. Johnson. I'll take good care of it." As Elena loaded her cart with supplies, her hands trembled slightly. She carefully placed her folder of research papers under a stack of cleaning rags, making sure they were completely hidden but easy to reach when she needed them. The elevator ride to the 18th floor felt like it took forever. Elena had cleaned these offices dozens of times, but today everything felt different. Today she wasn't just Elena, the cleaning lady. Today she was Elena, the problem solver, carrying the solution to a $100 million question. The executive floor was quieter than usual. Most of the meetings happened later in the morning, so Elena had a few hours to work before the important people started arriving. She began with the conference room, the same room where she'd first heard about the quantum computer crisis. As Elena cleaned the massive table where 12 powerful executives had discussed shutting down their quantum division, she thought about all the brilliant minds that had failed to solve this problem. Nobel Prize winners, professors from the world's best universities, engineers with decades of experience. And here she was, a 22-year-old who learned quantum mechanics from library books, convinced she had the answer they were all missing. Maybe she was crazy. Maybe her solution was completely wrong, and she was about to embarrass herself in front of one of the most successful businessmen in the world. But Elena remembered something her mother had told her years ago. "Mija, the only failure is not trying. Everything else is just learning." Elena finished the conference room and moved on to the other offices. She cleaned slowly, carefully, listening for any sign that Robert Sterling had arrived. Around 9:30, she heard voices coming from the direction of his corner office. Her heart started pounding so hard she was sure everyone on the floor could hear it. She pushed her cart closer to Sterling's office, pretending to organize her supplies while actually trying to figure out what was happening inside. Through the slightly open door, she could hear Robert on a phone call. His voice sounded tired, frustrated. "No, I understand the board's concerns, but I'm not ready to give up yet. We've invested too much in this project to quit now." There was a pause. "Yes, I know what I said about the $100 million. I meant every word of it." Elena took a deep breath. This was it. This was her moment. If she didn't act now, she might never get another chance. The cleaning cart suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as she pushed it toward Robert Sterling's office. She knocked gently on the door frame. Robert looked up from his phone call, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. Elena had seen him from a distance before, but never this close. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe in his early 40s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it all morning. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes. "I'm sorry," Elena said quietly. "I can come back later to clean your office." Robert waved her in distractedly and continued his phone conversation. "Look, just give me another week. If we can't make progress by then, we'll discuss other options." Elena entered the office and began dusting the bookshelves, trying to work quietly while Robert finished his call. The office was enormous by her standards, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and enough space for a sitting area with leather chairs. Awards and framed photographs covered one wall, telling the story of Robert Sterling's rise from startup founder to tech billionaire. "Fine," Robert said into the phone, his voice sharp with frustration. "We'll talk Monday." He hung up and rubbed his temples, muttering something under his breath about investors and short-sighted thinking. Elena saw her opportunity. Her voice came out much smaller than she'd intended. "Mr. Sterling? I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I might be able to help with your quantum computer problem." Robert looked up sharply, as if he'd forgotten she was there. For a moment, he just stared at her, probably trying to process why his cleaning lady was talking about quantum computers. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Elena's mouth felt dry, but she forced herself to continue. "I heard about the decoherence issues during the board meeting yesterday. I'm a doctoral student in quantum physics, and I think I might have a solution." Robert's expression shifted from confusion to something that might have been amusement. "You're a doctoral student in quantum physics?" "Yes, sir. At the university downtown. I work here part-time to pay for school." Robert leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with new interest. "And you think you can solve a problem that has stumped teams of experts from MIT and Cambridge?" Elena could hear the skepticism in his voice, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe, or desperation. "I know how it sounds, Mr. Sterling, but I've been working on quantum error correction for my thesis, and I think everyone has been approaching this problem backward." "Backward?" Elena reached under her cleaning rags and pulled out her folder. "Instead of trying to prevent quantum decoherence, what if we embraced it? What if we could redirect those random crashes into controlled channels that actually make the system more stable?" Robert stared at the folder in Elena's hands. "You have this worked out? Mathematical proofs, computer simulations, implementation plans for your specific hardware configuration, everything." The office fell silent except for the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Robert Sterling, who had built a $50 billion company by recognizing opportunities that others missed, was trying to decide whether to listen to a cleaning lady's radical theory about quantum mechanics. Finally, he spoke. "What's your name?" "Elena Vasquez, sir. Elena Vasquez." Robert repeated her name slowly, as if testing how it sounded. "Do you understand what you're claiming? That you've solved a problem worth potentially billions of dollars?" Elena straightened her shoulders, drawing on every ounce of confidence she'd built over years of late-night studying and early-morning cleaning shifts. "Mr. Sterling, I understand exactly what I'm claiming, and I understand that it sounds impossible coming from someone like me. But mathematics doesn't care about what uniform I'm wearing or where I come from. It only cares about whether the equations work." Robert smiled for the first time since Elena had entered his office. "You know what? You're absolutely right. Mathematics doesn't care about uniforms." He gestured to the chairs in his sitting area. "Why don't you have a seat and show me what you got?" Elena's legs felt shaky as she walked over to the leather chairs. This was really happening. Robert Sterling, one of the most powerful men in the tech industry, was about to listen to her explain quantum mechanics. As she opened her folder and spread out her research papers on the coffee table, Elena thought about her mother, probably cleaning someone's house at that very moment, and how proud she would be if she could see this. "Mr. Sterling," Elena began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "What I'm about to show you is going to sound crazy at first, but I promise you, by the time I'm done, it's going to make perfect sense." Robert leaned forward in his chair, giving Elena his complete attention for the first time. "I'm listening." Elena's hands stopped shaking the moment she opened her research folder. This was her world now, the world of quantum mechanics and mathematical proofs where she felt completely at home. She pulled out the first page, a complex diagram showing quantum particle behavior, and placed it on the coffee table between herself and Robert Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, before I explain my solution, I need to ask you something. What do your engineers think is causing the crashes?" Robert leaned forward, studying the diagram. The equations meant nothing to him, but he could tell they were sophisticated. "They believe it's random quantum decoherence, particles losing their quantum states unpredictably, which destroys the calculations." Elena nodded. "That's exactly what I thought they would say. And that's exactly why they haven't been able to fix it." She pulled out another sheet covered in mathematical formulas. "Everyone is treating decoherence like it's the enemy. But what if it's not? What if it's actually trying to help?" "Help?" Robert's eyebrows rose. "How can something that destroys our work be helping?" Elena stood up and walked over to Robert's whiteboard, picking up a marker. "May I?" "Please, go ahead." She began drawing a simple diagram, circles and arrows that looked nothing like the complex equations in her folder. "Imagine your quantum computer is like a river. Right now, your engineers are trying to build dams to stop the water from flowing in certain directions. But rivers don't like dams. They find ways around them, over them, through them. Eventually, the pressure builds up so much that the dam breaks and you get a flood. Robert was following along, nodding slowly. The flood is our system crash. Exactly. But what if instead of building dams, we dug channels? What if we gave the river exactly where we wanted it to go? Elena drew flowing lines on the board, showing water moving in controlled paths. In quantum mechanics, particles want to lose coherence. It's natural for them. Fighting that natural tendency is what's causing your crashes. Elena returned to her folder and pulled out a thick stack of computer printouts. I ran over 200 simulations using your exact hardware specifications. Instead of preventing decoherence, my system creates controlled decoherence pathways. The particles lose coherence exactly where and when we want them to, and that actually makes the overall computation more stable. Robert picked up one of the simulation results, squinting at the numbers and graphs. These results show 0 crashes over a 6-month simulation period. 0 crashes, and actually improved processing speed, Elena confirmed. When you stop fighting the natural behavior of quantum particles and start working with it, everything becomes more efficient. Robert set down the papers and looked at Elena with growing amazement. You're telling me that instead of trying to prevent the problem, we should intentionally cause it in a controlled way? Think of it like controlled burns in forest management, Elena explained, her confidence growing with each word. Instead of trying to prevent all fires and risking a massive wildfire, you deliberately start small fires that clear out the underbrush and actually prevent bigger disasters. Robert stood up and began pacing around his office, a habit Elena had noticed during yesterday's board meeting. This is completely opposite to everything our teams have tried. That's because conventional quantum error correction assumes that decoherence is always bad. But I've discovered that certain types of controlled decoherence can actually create quantum error correcting codes that fix themselves. Elena pulled out her most important document, a detailed implementation plan. I've worked out exactly how to modify your existing hardware. It wouldn't require rebuilding the entire system, just reprogramming the quantum control algorithms and adjusting some of the magnetic field generators. Robert stopped pacing and stared at her. You know the specifications of our quantum control algorithms? Elena blushed slightly. They were published in the Journal of Quantum Computing last year when you announced the project. I've studied every paper your team has written. And you think this approach will work on our specific system? I don't think it will work, Mr. Sterling. I know it will work. Elena's voice carried absolute certainty. The mathematics are solid, the simulations are flawless, and the physics make perfect sense once you see quantum decoherence as a tool instead of an obstacle. Robert picked up his phone and dialed an extension. David, I need you in my office right now. Bring Dr. Peterson from the quantum lab. He hung up and turned back to Elena. I hope you're ready to explain this to some very skeptical physicists. Elena's stomach fluttered with nerves, but she nodded. I'm ready. Within 5 minutes, 2 men entered Robert's office. The first was David Chen, the chief technology officer Elena had seen at yesterday's board meeting. The second was older, with wild gray hair and thick glasses, clearly one of the company's top scientists. David, Dr. Peterson, I'd like you to meet Elena Vasquez, Robert said. She's a doctoral student in quantum physics who believes she's solved our decoherence problem. David looked confused. I don't understand. Is she consulting for one of the universities we hired? Actually, Robert said with a slight smile, she works for our cleaning service. And she was in the conference room yesterday when we discussed the $100 million challenge. Dr. Peterson's expression shifted from confusion to barely concealed irritation. Robert, we're in the middle of a crisis. I don't have time for games. This isn't a game, Elena said firmly, standing up with her research folder. And I understand your skepticism. But before you dismiss my work, I'd like you to look at my mathematical proofs. She handed Dr. Peterson her most technical document, 20 pages of pure quantum mechanics equations. As the older scientist scanned the first page, his expression began to change. His eyebrows rose higher with each equation. Where did you learn to write quantum field theory equations like this? Dr. Peterson asked, his tone completely different now. I taught myself from textbooks and research papers. I've been studying quantum mechanics for 6 years. Dr. Peterson flipped to the next page, then the next, his eyes moving rapidly across the complex formulas. "David, look at this." He handed the paper to the CTO. "These aren't undergraduate-level equations. This is graduate-level theoretical physics." David studied the papers with growing amazement. "Elena, these calculations, they're addressing exactly the problems we've been struggling with. But your approach is completely different from anything we've tried. That's because everyone in quantum computing has been following the same basic assumptions for decades," Elena explained. "I approached the problem without those assumptions, just pure mathematics and physics." Dr. Peterson looked up from the equations. "You're proposing that we intentionally induce decoherence in specific quantum states?" "Controlled decoherence that creates self-correcting pathways. Instead of fighting the natural tendency of quantum systems to lose coherence, we harness that tendency to create stability." Dr. Peterson and David exchanged glances. "Robert," David said slowly, "I need to run these calculations through our simulation systems. If Elena is right—" He trailed off, shaking his head in disbelief. "If I'm right, you'll have a quantum computer that not only doesn't crash, but actually gets more stable over time," Elena finished. "The longer it runs, the better it gets at self-correction." Dr. Peterson sat down heavily in one of Robert's chairs. "In 30 years of quantum research, I've never seen anything like this approach. It's so simple, so elegant. Why didn't we think of it?" "Because you were too close to the problem," Elena said gently. "Sometimes you need fresh eyes, someone who isn't invested in the conventional solutions." Robert looked around his office at the 3 people who might be about to change his company's fate. "Dr. Peterson, how long would it take to test Elena's theory on our actual hardware?" "If these calculations are correct, we could have preliminary results within a week. Full implementation might take a month." "And if it works?" Dr. Peterson looked at Elena with newfound respect. "If it works, she'll have revolutionized quantum computing. This isn't just a fix for our problems. This is a completely new approach that could make quantum computers practical for everyday use." Elena felt her heart racing. "There's one more thing," she said, pulling out her final document. "I've also calculated how this approach could be scaled up. If it works on your current system, the same principles could be applied to build quantum computers 100 times more powerful than anything that exists today." Robert Sterling, who had spent months watching his company's value evaporate, slowly began to smile. "Elena Vasquez," he said, "I think you might have just saved Sterling Tech Industries." Elena smiled back, thinking about her mother who was probably scrubbing someone's kitchen floor at that very moment, completely unaware that her daughter was about to become one of the most important people in the tech industry. "Mr. Sterling," Elena said, "I think we're about to change the world." 1 week later, Elena stood in the quantum computing lab 3 floors below Robert Sterling's office, watching as Dr. Peterson made final adjustments to the massive machine that had caused so much trouble. The lab hummed with nervous energy as technicians checked connections and engineers monitored screens filled with data streams. Elena had barely slept during the past 7 days. Every morning, she'd arrived at Sterling Tech not as a cleaning lady, but as a consultant working directly with the company's top scientists. Dr. Peterson had insisted she be involved in every step of implementing her solution, recognizing that she understood the theory better than anyone. "Elena, we're ready for the final test," Dr. Peterson announced, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "Your modifications have been implemented exactly according to your specifications." The quantum computer filled most of the large room, a complex maze of supercooled chambers, laser arrays, and control systems that represented 5 years of development and billions of dollars in investment. Elena had spent the week learning every detail of its operation, translating her theoretical work into practical adjustments that could save Robert Sterling's company. Robert entered the lab with David Chen and several other executives. Word had spread quickly through the building that something extraordinary was happening. The cleaning lady's daughter, who had claimed she could solve their impossible problem, was about to prove whether her theory actually worked. "Elena," Robert said, walking over to where she stood near the main control console, "are you confident in your calculations?" Elena looked at the man who had taken the biggest risk of his career by believing in her. Mr. Sterling, I've checked and double-checked everything. The mathematics are perfect. The simulations all succeeded, and Dr. Peterson's team has implemented every detail correctly. This will work. Dr. Peterson began the startup sequence, and the quantum computer came to life with a low humming sound. Screens around the room lit up with readouts showing quantum state measurements, error rates, and processing speeds. Elena watched the numbers with intense focus, seeing patterns that most people couldn't understand. Initializing quantum coherence, Dr. Peterson announced. All systems are stable. Beginning first test calculation. The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of the machine. This was the moment of truth. For months, the quantum computer had been running fine for days or weeks before suddenly crashing and destroying all its work. Elena's solution was designed to prevent those crashes by creating controlled pathways for quantum decoherence. Minutes passed, then an hour. The machine continued running smoothly, processing complex calculations that would take regular computers thousands of years to complete. The error rates that had plagued the system for months were dropping to near zero. "This is impossible," whispered one of the engineers. "The coherence is actually getting better as the system runs longer." Elena smiled. "That's exactly what's supposed to happen. The controlled decoherence pathways are creating self-correcting quantum codes. The longer it runs, the more stable it becomes." After 3 hours of perfect operation, Robert Sterling could barely contain his excitement. The quantum computer was not only working flawlessly, but performing better than it ever had before. Elena's revolutionary approach had turned their biggest weakness into their greatest strength. "Elena," Robert said, his voice filled with emotion, "you've done something that teams of the world's best scientists couldn't accomplish. You've saved my company and potentially revolutionized an entire field of technology." Elena felt tears in her eyes as she watched the screens showing perfect quantum calculations running without any errors. "Mr. Sterling, this isn't just about saving your company. This technology could help solve climate change, develop new medicines, and answer questions about the universe that we've never been able to explore before." Robert pulled out his phone and made a call that Elena would remember for the rest of her life. "This is Robert Sterling. I need you to prepare a check for $100 million payable to Elena Vasquez. Yes, $100 million. She's earned every penny." The room erupted in cheers and applause from the engineers and technicians who had worked on the project for years. Elena stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed by the realization that her life had just changed completely. But Robert wasn't finished. "Elena, I also want to offer you a position as our Chief Innovation Officer, starting immediately. Your salary would be $5 million per year, plus stock options that could be worth hundreds of millions more if the company continues to grow." Elena's knees felt weak. A few weeks ago, she had been cleaning these same offices for minimum wage, worried about paying for ramen noodles and bus fare. Now she was being offered more money than she had ever imagined possible. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Dr. Peterson encouraged. "Elena, you have a gift that shouldn't be wasted cleaning offices. You belong here, working on problems that could change the world." Elena thought about her mother, Rosa, who was probably cleaning someone's house at that very moment, the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her daughter a chance at a better life. "I accept, Mr. Sterling, but I have one condition." Robert raised his eyebrows. "What's that?" "I want to start a scholarship program for students from low-income families who want to study science and engineering. Kids who are brilliant but can't afford college shouldn't have to choose between education and survival." Robert's smile grew even wider. "Elena, that's exactly the kind of thinking we need more of in this company. Consider it done." Later that afternoon, Elena sat in her new office, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough space for a small conference table. She could hardly believe it was real. The nameplate on her door read, "Elena Vasquez, Chief Innovation Officer," and she had to keep looking at it to convince herself she wasn't dreaming. Her first call was to her mother. Rosa was cleaning a house across town when her phone rang, and Elena could hear the surprise in her voice when she answered. "Mita, why are you calling during work hours? Are you okay?" "Mama, I need you to sit down. I have something incredible to tell you." Elena explained everything that had happened, from overhearing the board meeting to presenting her solution to Robert Sterling's offer. There was silence on the other end of the line for a long moment.
Misha,
Rosa finally whispered, her voice thick with tears.
I always knew you were special.
I always knew that education would open doors for you. But this is beyond anything I ever dreamed. Mama, you can stop cleaning houses. You can retire. I'm going to buy you a beautiful home with a garden, and you'll never have to worry about money again. Rosa was crying now, and Elena could hear her trying to compose herself. Elena, I'm so proud of you. Your father would have been so proud too. You've done something amazing, not just for yourself, but for the whole world. That evening, Elena returned to her tiny studio apartment one last time. Tomorrow, she would start looking for a new place to live, somewhere with more than 400 square feet and windows that actually opened properly. But tonight, she wanted to spend a few hours in the place where she had worked out the solution that changed her life. She sat at her folding table, looking at the quantum mechanics textbooks that had taught her everything she knew. The apartment looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed completely. Elena was no longer a cleaning lady studying physics at night. She was a chief innovation officer at one of the world's most important technology companies. But the most amazing part wasn't the money or the title or the recognition. It was the knowledge that her work would help other people. The quantum computers built using her revolutionary approach would help scientists find cures for diseases, help engineers design cleaner energy systems, and help researchers answer questions about the universe that had puzzled humanity for centuries. Elena pulled out her laptop and began writing an email to Professor Williams, her quantum mechanics teacher who had unknowingly encouraged her breakthrough. She wanted to tell him that his student had found a practical application for the theoretical concepts he'd been teaching, and that sometimes the most important discoveries came from the most unexpected places. As she typed, Elena smiled, thinking about the conversation that had started it all. Robert Sterling had sneered that he would give $100 million to anyone who could fix his problem, never imagining that the solution would come from someone he saw every day, but never really noticed. Sometimes the most brilliant minds were hiding in plain sight, just waiting for someone to give them a chance to shine. Elena had proven that genius didn't require expensive suits or prestigious degrees or powerful connections. All it required was curiosity, determination, and the courage to speak up when you had something important to say. The next morning, Elena would begin her new life as one of the most important people in the technology industry. But tonight she was still just Elena Vasquez, a young woman who had solved an impossible problem with nothing but mathematics, determination, and the belief that education really was the key to changing everything.